The CFA franc, used by over 180 million people in 14 African nations, is both a symbol of stability and a shackle of neocolonialism. Its story is not just about money, but about sovereignty, identity, and the lingering shadow of colonial power. Supporters praise its stability and low inflation, while critics argue it stifles growth and keeps African economies tied to French interests. As anti-French sentiment rises, the CFA franc has become the ultimate symbol in Africa's fight for true economic independence. The story of the CFA franc begins not in Africa but in the heart of post-war Paris, a city still reeling from the devastation of World War II yet determined to rebuild its influence and power. In the shadow of crumbling buildings and amidst the hope of renewal, French leaders sought ways to reassert their nation's global standing. The creation of a new currency would become a key part of this strategy. In 1945, General Charles de Gaulle and his government established the Franc of the French colonies of Africa, or CFA Franc. This was not just a financial instrument but a tool of policy, designed to keep France's colonial empire closely tied to the metropole, even as the world order shifted. Through the CFA franc, France ensured that its colonies would remain economically dependent. The currency made it easier for French companies to extract resources like cocoa, coffee, and minerals from African soil, and to sell French goods back to the colonies. This system created a cycle where African economies were locked into serving French interests, with little room for independent growth or diversification. Even after the wave of African independence in the 1960s, the CFA franc's structure barely changed. Its name was updated, but the fundamentals remained. The currency was still pegged to the French franc, printed in France, and its monetary policy dictated from Paris. For many, this was independence in name only. Guinea, under the bold leadership of Sékou Touré, was the only country to reject the CFA system in 1960. Touré's decision was a declaration of true sovereignty, but it came at a heavy cost. France responded with hostility, determined to make an example of Guinea for the rest of its former colonies. The infamous Operation Persil saw French agents flood Guinea with counterfeit currency, destabilizing its economy and sending a chilling message to other African nations. Breaking free from the CFA would not be tolerated. The operation crippled Guinea's fledgling financial system and served as a stark warning. For decades, this legacy of fear, control, and economic dependency has shaped the decisions of African leaders. Many have weighed the risks of challenging the CFA system, knowing the potential consequences for their country's stability and prosperity. Today, the CFA franc's colonial DNA is still visible, not just in its design but in the very way it operates. Its story is a reminder that the past continues to shape the present, and that the struggle for true economic independence in Africa is far from over. The CFA franc zone, a legacy of colonial rule, is split into two blocks, UEMOA in West Africa and CMAC in Central Africa. Though they share a currency name, each has its own central bank and monetary policy, reflecting boundaries drawn by former European powers. UEMOA and CMAC issue their own versions of the CFA franc, but the currencies aren't interchangeable. A CFA franc from Senegal can't be used in Cameroon, creating barriers to trade and movement. This division limits regional integration and economic cooperation, making the union more symbolic than practical. Member countries are diverse. Some, like Gabon, rely on oil, while others, like Ivory Coast, are agricultural powerhouses. Yet all are bound by the same monetary policy, often shaped by France, limiting their autonomy and flexibility. The CFA franc zone offers stability, but also perpetuates dependency and division, hindering true economic independence. France's control over the CFA franc is built into the system's mechanics. All CFA banknotes and coins are printed in France. African nations must buy their own currency from their former colonizer. The fixed exchange rate to the euro is guaranteed by France, but only if African states deposit half their foreign reserves in Paris. This gives France oversight and leverage over member economies. Recent reforms in West Africa ended France's board seat and reserve requirement, but France still guarantees the peg, maintaining its influence. In Central Africa, the old system remains unchanged. Critics argue these reforms are cosmetic, not structural. Real power still lies in Paris. The CFA franc offers stability, low inflation, predictable exchange rates, and investor confidence. shielding members from the currency chaos seen elsewhere in Africa. But this stability comes at the cost of sovereignty. Countries can't devalue their currency or set independent monetary policy, even in crisis. Oil price collapses and economic shocks have forced painful austerity, as countries can't adjust their currency to respond. Critics say the system prioritizes European interests and traps African economies in dependency. Supporters argue the benefits of stability outweigh the loss of control. The debate is a stark trade-off: security versus self-determination. The CFA franc's rigidity is both its strength and its greatest weakness. In recent years, military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have shaken West Africa, thrusting the CFA franc, a currency with colonial roots, into the spotlight. For many, it's a symbol of lingering foreign influence, and its future is now fiercely debated. The CFA franc has become a rallying point for those demanding true sovereignty and radical change. Across cities, military leaders and youth movements unite to call for an end to French monetary control. Demonstrations and debates are now common, with young people at the forefront demanding a break from the past and control over their financial future. The Alliance of Sahel States is openly discussing a new independent currency, signaling the boldest challenge yet to the CFA system. In Senegal, recent elections brought leaders promising CFA reform, amplifying calls for monetary independence through the ballot box. Meanwhile, ECOWAS's dream of a single eco-currency remains stalled, hindered by French influence and mistrust among states. What began as a technical debate is now a movement led by young Africans demanding control of their own money and future. The future of the CFA franc stands at a crossroads. Its fate will shape the region's path toward true independence and prosperity. Defenders of the CFA franc point to its record of stability, low inflation, and reliable trade with Europe. Leaders like Ivory Coast's Alassane Ouattara argue the system provides discipline and investor confidence that fragile economies need. The fear of chaos, hyperinflation, capital flight, and institutional weakness makes many wary of abandoning the CFA. France's guarantee is seen as a safety net, especially for smaller economies. Memories of Guinea's punishment and Zimbabwe's currency collapse serve as cautionary tales. For many, the risks of change outweigh the frustrations of dependency. The CFA franc endures because, for some, it's the lesser of two evils. The CFA franc has become a lightning rod for anti-French sentiment, especially among Africa's youth. Protests, music, and art frame the currency as the last vestige of colonialism and a barrier to true independence. Activist groups and cultural leaders demand an end to the CFA, linking it to broader calls for decolonization. France's soft power persists, but the currency remains its most controversial lever. As long as the CFA exists, it will fuel resentment and challenge France's role in Africa. Africa stands at a crossroads, with the CFA franc debate crystallizing the tension between stability and sovereignty. Gradual reforms may appease some, but many see them as mere rebranding of neo-colonialism. A radical break, like a new Sahel currency, would be risky but could inspire broader change. Success would require building strong institutions and weathering economic shocks without France's safety net. The outcome will shape Africa's economic future: cling to the old order, or embrace the risks of true independence. The next chapter will be written by a generation determined to control its own destiny. The world is watching as Africa decides whether to finally mint a new future.